Hi, welcome to Theory Class. My name is Sam Johnson. I am so excited to be helping out with Worship Lab again this year, in 2020. But I've loved getting to help out with Worship Lab in the past. It really has been one of the highlights of my experiences at Baylor. But currently I am the music minister at FBC Hewitt. I was so excited to be there. I've been there a bit over 6 months after I graduated from seminary. But that's enough about me. Let's dive into theory. So today we're going to be focusing on the major scale, what patterns make up the major scale. I believe that this fundamental part of theory can really help a budding musician understand the music that's in front of them, start learning how to, building up their skills as in ear training, and really allow them to communicate better with other musicians, and maybe even allow them to be more creative when improvising or writing their own music. So, we're not going to be talking about how to read notation. We won't be talking about rhythm or how to notate rhythm. We really are just diving into this small portion of music theory during this time. So, without further ado, let's jump into the major scale. So let's talk about just musical alphabet. So we have a way to talk about different notes, and we have letters assigned to them. The first 7 letters of the alphabet. So we have A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And those cycle on either up or backwards. For example, up here we have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, but we also have going back from A, G, F, E, D, C, B, A, and it goes on both directions. So, and those 7 letter names correspond with what we call unaltered pitches. They're just as they are. These white notes, that's where we have all of our normal letter names assigned, and those are unaltered pitches. The white notes on a piano are unaltered pitches. But the black notes, those are our altered pitches. So, all in all, taking both the altered and the unaltered pitches, the total of those give us 12 distinct tones in Western music from which to play with and to mold our music. So, I'll count them real quick just to show you. So starting at C, we have a 1, and then the black note 2, D is 3, and then the black note 4, E is 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I didn't count the next C because then it starts over again. But that's 12 distinct notes. So, I've gone ahead and taken the liberty of writing out a C major scale. That's what we're going to be working from today. Because of all the major scales, C is the easiest to work with because it just uses white notes or unaltered pitches. So, a major scale always follows this pattern. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. And those are talking about the intervals. And we'll talk about those more here in a moment. But, here, let's see. Let's talk about the scale degrees That is just the order of the notes, because we're going to be talking about that here a bit more when we talk about chords. But, so the first note in the C major scale is of course C. So we would call that scale degree 1. That caret above these numbers just represents scale degree. It's the sign we use to communicate that in music theory. So C is the first note, then D is the second note, so it would be scale degree 2 in the C major scale. E is the third note, so it would be scale degree 3. F is the fourth note, so it's scale degree 4. G is scale degree 5. A is scale degree 6. B is scale degree 7. And then at C, it's just 1 again, even though it's on the whole other side of things. It just starts to repeat like we were already saying. So another way you may have heard or have been taught or just heard somebody maybe actually using it, there's a technique that singers especially use. It's something called solfege, and this technique is meant for training singers and other musicians to understand this exact thing, which notes are where each note comes in the midst of a scale. So what solfege does is it takes a syllable and it assigns it to each scale degree of the major scale. So we have do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, and then do. So that is solfege. It's super helpful to learn how to sing a major scale, but also helps you to learn how to read music quicker, and it builds that ear training in. So, next step we have is we're going to talk about intervals. And intervals are the relationship between notes or the distance between any two notes. So, this is one of those things where it is super helpful to look at a piano keyboard. So, albeit using this one at the top to show you examples. But, so the C major scale is made of unaltered pitches, which means we get to use just the white notes on the piano. But let's talk about the difference between whole steps and half steps. So whole steps are exactly what they sound like. 2 half steps equal a whole. Starting from C and going to D, there's another note in between those. You see that black note right here? Going from C to that black note, that's a half step. From that black note to D, that's another half step. Going from D to E, there's another black note. So between D, or going from D to that black note, that's another half step. From that black note onto E, that's a half step. So, going from C to D, we talked about there's that black note in between. So C to that black note is a half step, and then that black note to D is a half step. If we were just to say what the interval was between C and D, that's 2 half steps. So that equals a whole step. Let's look going from E to F. So E to F, there's no black note in between. So it's a half step. Then from F to G, there's a black note in between them. You can see it. So that would mean that from F to G, that's a whole step. Going all the way through the major scale and figuring out where those whole steps and half steps are. Again, in a C major scale, we only use those white notes. So we're just looking at the relationship between those white notes right now. But what we come down to is the major scale pattern. In that, you can see up here, those intervals follow whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. So those are the intervals between each note. So let's see, we already said D, or C to D was a whole step, so check. D to E is a whole step, so that's check. E to F is a half step, so good. Then F to G is a whole step, good. G to A, black note in between, so that's a whole step, check. A to B, black note in between, so that's a whole step, good. And then B to C, there's no black note in between, so that's a half step. So a major scale, like it can start on any note, unaltered or altered. As long as it follows that major scale pattern, it'll be major. If it doesn't follow that pattern, then it's not going to sound major and it won't be major. So the entirety of a C major scale, from C to C, that is the span or the interval of an octave. It's what we call the interval of 8 letter names. Music is weird, just so you know, because when we start counting intervals, we start by counting the letter we start from as 1. So half steps are different. Half steps go into intervals and make up intervals, but when we're talking about intervals specifically, we count the letters. For example, 1, 2, C to D, that is a second. Going from C to E, we count 1, 2, 3, so C to E is a third. Going from C to F, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. C to F is a fourth. C to G is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's a fifth. C to A, we have to count from C, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's a sixth. C to B, that is a seventh. And C to C, that's an eighth. Like we said earlier, an eighth is a full octave. So what's cool about intervals is that they can also have qualities associated with them. And what that means is that they can either be major or minor. They can also be perfect, and on occasion, they can be diminished or augmented, but we'll save those for a different lesson. We won't have any of those today. So, if we start from the bottom, let's just take a look at those same intervals that we just looked at, but we'll apply qualities to them, major, minor, or perfect. So, whenever we're talking about a unison, which would be C to C, is the distance of 0 half steps, but it's the same letter, so it's a 1. Then, unisons are perfect. There are 3 other intervals that will be perfect, and we'll get to those as we come. So, interval of a unison, C to C, here is perfect unison. So C to D, that's going to be a major second. C to E is a major third. C to F is a perfect fourth. C to G is a perfect fifth. C to A is a major sixth. C to B is a major seventh. And then C to C is a perfect octave. So C to that C, a perfect octave. So, if you're taking notes, what you'll have noticed is that we didn't assign any of those intervals as a minor. That's because in a major scale, if you're starting from this note and going up to another note, it's always going to be major or perfect. So what are the instances that we have other types of qualities and intervals, even in the major scale? Well, when we start from another note other than C, or if we do these intervals going in the opposite direction, that's when we get minor intervals. So let's talk about these qualities real quick, just to hammer them away. So perfect intervals, the perfect quality is only applied to a unison, only applied to fourths and fifths and octaves. So majors and minors, major quality and minor quality intervals are only applied to seconds, thirds, and sixths and sevenths. So over here you'll see I've written out a chart that has a type of interval and how many half steps there are in that interval. We're going to go through each one and I'll show you in the C major scale where they occur. So a unison is 0 half steps. It would be this C to the exact same C. It sounds like this. Perfect unison. Okay, the next interval on our chart is the minor second. A quick note, you'll see that going from this interval to the next interval, both of them are seconds, but one is notated with a lowercase m, the next is notated with an uppercase m. That is to distinguish between minor and major. In music theory, that's something that we have to do. So whenever we're talking about minor, it's always lowercase. Whenever we're talking about major, it's always uppercase. That's just a quick side note. So minor seconds, those have 1 half steps. So there are 2 instances of this in the C major scale. And if you remember our pattern, the major scale pattern, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, we find those minor seconds where those half steps are. So between E and F are unaltered pitches. That's where 1 minor second is, and that sounds like this. Then our next instance of that would be between B and C. That's another minor second. So that sounds like this. Our next interval is the major second, and this has 2 half steps in distance. We have 5 instances of this, and that would be, of course, where we see these in our major scale pattern, whole, 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 whole. Those are all major seconds. So we have C to D, that sounds like this. That's a whole step, or a major second. Then we go from D to E, and that's a whole step, or a major second. Then we already talked about how E to F is a minor second, so let's skip to F and go to G. That is a major second. G to A is a major second. A to B is a major second. And then B to C, like we already talked about, is a minor second. So A minor third is next, and that is the distance of 3 half steps. And we have 4 examples of this in the C major scale. Minor third is a three half steps. All right, so this is when we just have to get down and do some of the math. Our first minor third, starting from the bottom of the scale, is D. 1, 2, 3. That's a third. D to F is a third. It's also, if we look up here, 1, 2, 3 half steps. So it is a minor third. All right, the next one would be E, starting at E. 1, 2, 3. The third up from E is G, and that would be, let's go up here and count the half steps. 1, 2, 3. 3 half steps, so that's a minor third. E to G is a minor third. Then, starting from A, going up to C, that would be a third because we have 1, 2, 3. We'll count them, A, and then 1 half step, 2 half step, 3 half step, so it's a minor third. Then B, and I know it doesn't look like it, but you have to remember that the scale keeps going. So starting at B, we can go up another third, 1, 2, 3, to that D that's higher. Look at the keyboard real quick. So B, 1 half step up to C, and then another half step, so that's 2, and then 3 half steps up to D. So that would be another minor third. So those are our minor thirds. Major thirds, we have 3 instances of. And those are essentially all the thirds that we haven't talked about so far. C to E, 1, 2, 3, that's a third. And then look up here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 half steps, and that's a major third. Then at F, we have 1, 2, 3. That's so that's a third, and we have a 1, 2, 3, 4 half steps. So there's one more, and that's G. 1, 2, 3. G up a third is G to B, and the quality of that, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 half steps, and so that is a major third. Then a perfect fourth. We have several instances of this. Just know that the main two in here are going to be C, 1, 2, 3, 4 to F, and we'll double check that, see how many half steps there are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sorry, counted the wrong way. Because again, with the half steps, you count them as you would normally count things, while with half steps, you don't count where you start from. But with letter names, you do start counting with what you start with. So that's why we have, starting from C, we have a 1, 2, 3, 4. C to F is a fourth. And then starting from C to F in half steps, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 half steps. So that means it's a perfect fourth. G going up to C is a perfect fourth. Let's skip to the next one, the fun one, the tritone. There are 2 instances of this. It's essentially the same instance of it. It's the same notes. It's just flipped. So that would be F to B here, F to B, or B to F. And those are 6 half steps. Perfect fifths are 7 half steps, and the minor sixth is 8 half steps. The major sixth is 9 half steps, and the minor seventh is 10 half steps. The major seventh is 11 half steps, and the octave is 12 half steps. The cool thing with these is that because of the cyclical nature of the musical alphabet and how it ends up repeating, these intervals have inversion relationships with other intervals. So what that means is, okay, if you look, C to E from this direction, like we said earlier, that's a major third. But if we flip the location of one of these letters, say we're going to keep E, but this C is now going to be this C. So we're looking at these two notes. Then that distance is a lot bigger than a third. What we end up having is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have a distance of a sixth. And that sixth is a minor sixth. So whenever we look at inversions, the quality switches and the numbers have to add up to 9. I know, it's a little extra to handle. But so minor seconds are inverted to major sevenths. Major seconds would be inverted to minor sevenths, and then minor thirds would be inverted to major sixth, and then a major third is inverted to a minor sixth, and whenever we get to the perfect intervals, perfect always inverts to perfect. So a perfect fourth inverts to a perfect fifth. And then a tritone, like we said already, there were 2 instances, just it was flip-flopped. The F to B and then the B to F. So that is, there's one tritone in C major, and yeah. So the reason why I didn't talk about inversions of unisons or octaves is because they don't invert. They don't have, the only way you can invert something is if it has a different note. Octaves would invert to another octave, and unisons don't move anywhere. So what I mean for the octave is that if we have C to C right here, that's an octave, a perfect octave. If we keep one of them the same, let's say we keep this C the same, then that one has to move all the way down to this C, but it's still a perfect octave. So those are inversions. And now we're going to dive into chords real quick. And this is where the real fun stuff starts. The reason why we did intervals before we did chords was because you have to understand intervals before we start talking about chords, because chords are made up of intervals. So we're going to talk about the most rudimentary of chords, and that is the triad. So the triad, I'll write it out. Triad is made up of 3 notes. And those 3 notes are decided upon, it's comprised, a triad is comprised of 2 stacked thirds. And so let's say 3 notes, 3 notes, and it's third plus a third. In addition to that, triads can have, for the most part, 2 qualities that we're going to be talking about today. They can either be major or they can be minor. So let's talk, or let's start on scale degree 1 and see what triad we have from scale degree 1. So scale degree 1 again is C. So we talked about triads have 3 notes. A way to figure out what those notes are is to start with a note in, and we're still sticking to C major here, just to be clear. So we're starting from scale degree 1. That'll be the basis of our triad, the root of our triad. We have to go up a third. So going up a third from C would be 1, 2, 3 to E. E is our second note in a C triad, C major triad. Going up from E, we need another third, so 1, 2, 3. We end up with G. So those 3 notes are C, E, G. So that is our triad built on scale degree 1. If you had all the intervals written out, the qualities of each interval, what we ended up talking about, what we will end up talking about are the quality of these thirds and why they're important. So if you wrote down what we already did earlier, figure out where all the minor thirds and the major thirds are in this paradigm of the C major scale, then you already know what the relationship of these thirds are. The reason why those are important is because what type of thirds these are designates what the quality of the triad is. So C to E, that's a major third, because that is, again, 1, 2, 3, 4 half steps. Going from E to G, then we get, I'm gonna give you a second. Sorry, I keep waiting to hear you, but I don't. We have 3 half steps, and that means it's a minor third. Now in a triad, in either a major or a minor triad, the quality of the first third, so C to E, is what tells us what the quality of the entire triad is. So a CEG in C major is a major triad. So we end up having a major. Our triad built from scale degree 1, which is C, E, G, is major. Alright, so I would love to be able to go through all of these and do one for each scale degree. Sadly, I don't have time, so we're going to do one more, and then we're going to look at one more thing, and that'll be it for our lesson, sadly. But let's look. We're going to start on scale degree 2 and try to figure out what our triad is there and the quality of it. So, starting from D, we have a D right here. A third up from that, because a triad has 3 notes and it's made up of 2 stacked thirds. So D, 1, 2, 3. The next note is F. Then we have to go up one more third because it has to have 2 stacked thirds. F, 1, 2, 3. And so we have, for our triad built on scale degree 2, we have D, F, A. So, now we have to do the dirty work and figure out what the quality of these thirds are. So D to F, is 1, 2, 3 half steps. If you remember from over here, 3 half steps is a minor third. So minor third. Then F to A is a 1, 2, 3, 4 half steps. So that would make it a major third. Major third. Okay, so this is the opposite of what we just had a moment ago. The C, E, G was first a major third and then a minor third. This is flip-flopped, if you see. We start with a minor third and then we have a major third. So the quality of this chord is decided again on the first triad. I'm sorry. The quality of the triad is decided upon by the quality of the first third, which in this case is a minor third. So the quality of the triad built on scale degree 2 is minor. Alright, so if we were to do all of these, what we would end up having is excuse me. First, on scale degree 1, we have a major, 2 is minor, 3 is minor, then the triad built on scale degree 4 is major, scale degree 5 is major, scale degree 6, the chord built on scale degree 6 is minor, 7 is something different. So if we were going to look at the triad built on B, what we end up having is B, 1, 2, 3, D. Let's look at here because, again, it just keeps on going. The alphabet does. So D, 1, 2, 3. We have F next. So, let's figure this out. We have 1, 2, 3 half steps, so that's a minor third. D to F is also a minor third. So this is weird. This is where it gets tricky. We don't have a differentiation. The other two chords that we did together, the C major chord and the D minor chord, both had a major third and a minor third, just in different orders. And that's really important because a major third plus a minor third together, so those outer spans of the triad, let's look at C, G, C to G. So here's a major third, there's a minor third, but those outer two notes are equal to a perfect fifth. So a minor third plus a major third, or a major third plus a minor third equals a perfect fifth. That's why we have that sound that's like this. So without that middle third, we don't know the quality of the chord. But those two notes on the outside, C, will stay there regardless of whether it's major or minor. So that's why having two triads that are the same, in this case two minor thirds, completely changes the sound of this chord. What we end up having is what we call a oh, my mind just blanked. What we have is a diminished triad. So that sounds like this. Different than a normal minor chord would sound like. So the minor chord that we talked about already was the D minor chord, and that sounds like this. That's D minor. This is C major. This is B diminished. Now, this is the only occurrence of a chord, of a triad in C major with that is not major or minor. All the rest of them are major or minor, as we see here. So we have the triad on B that is diminished, and that's usually notated with this little degree sign. But so these are the qualities of our chords built on each scale degree. And the reason why this is important is because you'll see a lot of time on chord sheets, they'll tell you which chord is major or minor, but with a big M if they have to, or nothing at all. They'll just do the letter, and that means it's major. Or you'll see a letter name like this with a little M next to it, and that means A minor. But there are also those musicians who like to use Nashville numbers. In Nashville numbers, you essentially substitute your normal chord chart for a number chart. So instead of chord or letter names, you end up with just numbers. And that gives it a cleaner look because you don't have to include things like the quality. It's already assumed because they know this pattern. So what it ends up being, maybe you've heard musicians say, yeah, right there we go to the 6 chord, or here we go to the 2 chord, or that's the 5 chord going to the 1, or all those number things. This is exactly what this is. So what we end up having is, here's this pattern, like our normal major scale pattern. This is another pattern that does not change as long as the notes remain unaltered. So in a major scale, we always have this pattern. The chord built on scale degree 1 is major. The chord built on scale degree 2 is minor. Scale degree 3 is minor. The chord built on scale degree 4 is major. The chord built on scale degree 5 is major. The chord built on scale degree 6 is minor. The chord built on scale degree 7 we hardly ever use in contemporary Christian, but that's a diminished triad. And then it repeats. So now you know how to read Nashville numbers, and you know all of these things about the major scale and just how important this pattern is, both the scale pattern but also the pattern that these triads make when overlaid on a major scale. I hope this is helpful to you guys. If you have any questions, I'd love to answer them. Maybe we'll figure out a way for you guys to submit questions and we can answer them. But until then, I hope you guys are able to be with us next year in Worship Lab. But until then, may God's blessings be upon you. See you later.